Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberation Library Book Reviews on the Liberty Weekly podcast. As always, I'm your host, Patrick McFarlane. And today I'm going to be reviewing a very controversial book by a rather controversial author, and that is On Killing, The Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. And as always, the show notes for this episode can be found at libertyweekly.net/LL4. That is the letters LL and the number 4. And for listeners of the audio podcast only, this podcast will utilize video segments and is best viewed on my YouTube channel, linked in the show notes page, or at youtube.com/libertyweekly. And as well, this video will be embedded at libertyweekly.net for your viewing pleasure. So, as of last Thursday, I'm officially done with finals, and I took the weekend for myself to just relax after a finals period that ended up being a little more taxing than I had initially thought that it would be. But as I finished, I started watching the new Ken Burns documentary on the Vietnam War, aptly titled Ken Burns, The Vietnam War. And it is fascinating, and I really have been enjoying it so far. It's a look in at a conflict that I really don't know too much about historically. At least I didn't before viewing the first few episodes. And I'm very, very much aware of the narrative being established by Ken Burns, and so take that with a grain of salt. But the documentary itself is very well made, as most Ken Burns documentaries are, and it knows how to reach in and grip your heart like that, and kind of get to the epitome of what the conflict was, and telling that story with a real human angle. And in a way it's actually kind of nefarious, because Ken Burns is so good at establishing the narrative, and I think that essentially what these documentaries are is the mouthpiece of the official story. But I'll digress. But in any ways, viewing the documentary really made me remember reading this book a few months ago as I was beginning the podcast, and I really wanted to do an episode on this book, but never really had the means. It just never really materialized. But watching this and seeing the veterans in the movie talk about killing and their experience killing made me revisit this book, and I've been able to skim through it and offer this presentation for your viewing pleasure. But to present this book, I have a 4-point roadmap. And the first point I wanted to make, as discussed in the book, is that mankind naturally has a deep-set revulsion towards the taking of a fellow human life. And this is kind of a positive spin for this podcast, which is going to be very, very dark, actually. But that is the positive point, and the positive thing that is set forth in this book as well. However, establishing that truth and seeing what the U.S. military has done with it is the sad part of the story. But the second point that I want to make on that pathway is that the book documents the discovery of the fact that there is a deep-set human revulsion towards the taking of fellow human life. The book documents the discovery of that and details the evidence of this throughout history. And that actually kind of blew my mind, knowing that throughout history, the war as portrayed in films and in documentaries is nowhere near the reality of it, which is actually, as we'll see in the book, tending towards humans trying not to take each other's life. And we'll get into that. But the third point on this roadmap is, finally, the book outlines what the U.S. military and militaries around the world have done to condition their soldiers to overcome their innate opposition to the taking of human life. And that is the sad, disappointing part of this podcast that we'll get to. But then I wanted to talk a little bit about Dave Grossman himself and the broader effects on society of killing, but also Dave Grossman's involvement contracting for civilian policing and the military, and teaching how to overcome humans' inability to take human life. And I was disappointed reading this book, seeing that is the bent that he takes at it, is that he identifies this beautiful thing about humanity and then goes about to try and destroy it for the means of doing what the state says it is okay for people to do. which is kill in certain situations. But to set the overall tone of this episode and to lay the foundation of the underlying theme that I wanted to communicate here, I wanted to open with this message from James Corbett of the Corbett Report.
This is the story of Stefan Westman, a corporal in the German 29th Division, about his experience in the trenches. One day we got orders to storm a French position. We got in and my comrades fell right and left of me, but then I was confronted by a French corporal. He with his bayonet at the ready and I with my bayonet at the ready. For a moment I felt the fear of death, and in a fraction of a second I realized that he was after my life exactly as I was after his. I was quicker than he was. I tossed his rifle away and I ran my bayonet through his chest. He fell, put his hand on the place where I had hit him, and then I thrust again. Blood came out of his mouth and he died. I felt physically ill. I nearly vomited. My knees were shaking and I was quite frankly ashamed of myself. My comrades, I was a corporal there then, were absolutely undisturbed by what had happened. One of them boasted that he had killed a poilu with the butt of his rifle. Another one had strangled a captain, a French captain. A third one had hit somebody over the head with his spade, and they were ordinary men like me. One of them was a tram conductor, another one a commercial traveler, two were students, the rest were farm workers, ordinary people who never would have thought to do any harm to anyone. How did it come about that they were so cruel? I remembered then that we were told that the good soldier kills without thinking of his adversary as a human being. The very moment he sees in him a fellow man, he is not a good soldier anymore. But I had in front of me the dead man, the dead French soldier, and how would I like to have him raised his hand? I would have shaken his hand, and we would have been the best of friends, because he was, like me, nothing but a poor boy who had to fight, who had to go in with the most cruel weapons against a man who had nothing against him personally, who only wore the uniform of another nation, who spoke another language, but a man who had a father and mother and a family, perhaps, and so I felt. This is not an uncommon experience that we encounter in the stories of the people, the pawns, the cannon fodder that actually fought and died and spilled their blood in the trenches in World War I.
So essentially through James Corbett and through that soldier's testimony here, we can see that many soldiers have a physical revulsion towards the point of killing. And we see through the process of warfare, they have been able in some cases to dehumanize the enemy and to make them think of something less than human. And that is the only way that soldiers can carry through the act of killing without, or the way that they can justify it to themselves. And we see these violations of the non-aggression principle. I wanted to bring Rothbard into this and drive home the fact that without the state, there would be no war, or there would be significantly less violent, because war is really the health of the state, and war is when the state comes into its own. And we know as Rothbardians that war represents a pure economic loss, that it is merely destruction, and the process of war is the state privatizing the gains from war and socializing the losses, and sending citizens out to kill for the state, to protect the state from other states, and not to protect their family or liberty or any kind of abstraction. War is mass murder, and we can really see this fundamental underlying principle in it by analyzing the testimonies of soldiers who have had to kill in combat. And we're going to take a look at some of those testimonies right here.
Do you remember the first time you killed someone?
Yeah. We had to have him hold his intestines in when we got him to the chopper. I was the only one up there that wasn't hurt, and scared to death, really, 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 really scared. So I started asking, screaming for help. Somebody get up here and help me. I'm alone. And then two little heads. I was down, and all I could see was his head and shoulders. He had a hard hat on, and then I saw the red emblem. It was. And then when I could see a silhouette, I blasted silhouettes. They're not real people, they're just targets.
Is that how you kind of saw it? Would you try to disconnect them as people?
That was what we were taught to do. I just thought, that just came out. I didn't, that was what we were set, you know, those aren't people, those are silhouettes.
Was there ever another time that was memorable and you said it was
No,
about a year later?
the kills aren't, no, it's just that later, after you get home, he was a young man just like I was, only he was in his country, trying to keep me, the son of a bitch that's trying to take his country, from taking his country. I didn't try to make it wrong, it just was wrong.
One day I see a front full of airplanes coming towards us.
The streets walking.
Oh my God, planes, planes! I started screaming, and this one plane was no more than 100 feet above my head, if that. He was so low I could actually see the pilot. So I got on the 50 and I started firing at him, and it doesn't take too long. He goes right by, and I see my tracers going up, then I hit the plane. The pilot was ejected, and as soon as he ejected, he opened his parachute, and I started shooting at this pilot, and he's trying to maneuver it, and all of a sudden I see him swinging like this. He was as dead as could be. While I was doing that, I was thinking about this guy's poor mother doesn't know that he's gone. I'm the guy who killed him, and I told the story to the VA, and I tell you, I started tearing up, and so I said, "Doc, is there any way of erasing this from my mind?" He says, you will never forget it. There's no way, there's no pills or anything I can give you. He said, this is in your mind. It's indelibly in your mind.
As night falls on Christmas Eve, Allied soldiers are surprised by what they are hearing over from the German trenches. Private Frank Sumter is one of the first to recognize what they are singing.
And then we heard the Germans singing Silent Night, Holy Night. Our boys said, let's join in. So we joined in with the song.
The British sentries don't know what to make of what's happening across the narrow no man's land. Private Leslie Walkington was there.
So then we began to pop our heads over the side and jump down quickly in case they shot, but they didn't shoot. And then we saw a German standing up waving his arms, and we didn't shoot.
When they met on Christmas Truce, first they were afraid of each other, and then they started to talk and shaking hands, and once they did that, it just seemed to be friends.
The British khaki and the German grey are soon gathering, all mingled together.
By Christmas 1914, every soldier knew that the enemy was sharing the same misery as they were.
Both sides are well aware that consorting with the enemy is only one step away from treason, a crime punishable by court-martial and execution. Men on both sides go to sleep that night, wondering if they will wake up the next morning to renewed fighting or a continued effort to defy the war. The fear of punishment is enough to get most of the soldiers back to fighting.
How amazingly difficult it must have been for these people to pick up shooting again, and with any kind of vigor, try and kill people in the opposite trench that they just celebrated Christmas with.
Private Archibald Stanley remembers how his officer put an end to their armistice.
Well, if you're knocking around, this fella come up the next day. He said, you still got the armistice? Picked up his rifle and he shot one of the Germans dead.
So through this testimony, we can see that a lot of soldiers in combat have that inherent resistance to killing. Not all, but it is ironic that at the end of the day, it is the state, as we see in the Christmas miracle, the state or the army that has to come back in and snap these soldiers out of their inherent instinctual need to get along with other human beings and need to make peace and need to see these other human beings as actually human beings. And it wasn't until the World War II, when this phenomenon hadn't really been studied until World War II, when General S.L.A. Marshall did one of the first studies on soldiers non-firing during combat. And what he did, he conducted this research, and his singularly, I'm quoting here, his singularly unexpected discovery was that of every 100 men along the line of fire during the period of an encounter, an average of only 15 to 20%, quote, would take any part with their weapons. And that was an astounding discovery that had been glossed over throughout history. And this was his S.L.A. Marshall concluded this. He said, "It is therefore reasonable to believe that the average and healthy individual, the man who can endure the mental and physical stresses of combat, still has such an inner and usually unrealized resistance towards killing a fellow man that he will not, of his own volition, take life if it is possible to turn away from that responsibility. At the vital point, he becomes a conscientious objector." And that's just astounding to me. And I think that that is a beautiful thing about the human race that should be celebrated. And the sad part, as I said, is what the U.S. Army and armies around the world did once they discovered this study by S.L.A. Marshall. And so it was throughout history, they first took a look back at history, and this is documented in the book, that they found throughout history this phenomenon of non-firers. And they judged it by the firing rates, the actual firing rates of what they should have been in the smoothbore musket days, that having lines of soldiers line up at each other, you would think, given the accuracy that they have documented at the time, that the casualty rates would have been much higher than what they actually were. And it turns out that in the Civil War, hundreds of, or tens of thousands of men could line up against each other, not 100 yards away, and they would be shooting at each other all day long, and the casualties only mounted up after the length of time had progressed. So what the actual rate was in the battlefield was 1 to 2 men hit per every few minutes or something like that. And what the actual firing hit rate would have been way higher than that. And they should have expected a much higher casualty rate. Another thing, evidence that they found, was multiply loaded rifles at Civil War battlefields. That was talked about, that rifles would be loaded 7 or 8 times. They would just be loads stacked up on top of each other. And they went throughout history looking at accounts of the centurions fighting, or Alexander the Great actually only lost 700 men during combat throughout all of his campaigns, and that's documented in the book. So they did a lot of that, and also Dave Grossman talks about the mechanics of that, and how when usually you think fight or flight, that when a human being encounters an animal in the wild, there is a fight or flight response. Well, that becomes 4 different responses when humans fight each other. It's either you fight and kill, you flee, or you posture, or you submit. And what they have concluded throughout their studies of this is that what humans mostly do is posturing, and that is why in combat it's much better to posture, so you make yourself appear better and more threatening, and in the hopes that you will get your enemy to submit or run away. And he has documented this, the use and adoption of black powder rifles over, at the time, what would have been much more effective bow and arrow at actually killing people. But the boom made by the black powder rifles was actually more intimidating. Or you see this with the plumes that centurions would wear to make themselves appear more powerful, tall, and menacing. And in the Napoleonic Wars, you get big plumes on the top of the hats that make them appear taller. And so those are things that are all discussed in the book. And they're very eye-opening, talking about how dangerous it actually is to be in combat. And of course, you have it going up, increasing throughout, as things like long-range artillery comes into play and bombing runs that, well, that doesn't, the resistance to killing doesn't come as much into factor there, because the more close and intimate you are, the harder it becomes to kill. So you get all the discussion of that, and it's very eye-opening, and it will actually blow your mind, changing all of your preconceived notions of what combat actually is. And for that, even just that, this book is very, very good, and I would definitely recommend it for that. But so moving on from when the Army actually found this out and documented these multiple loaded rifles and found that out, the Army found out that when it comes to soldiers being in combat, the midbrain, the animalistic part of the brain, is what takes over, and it is not the high faculties of the forebrain. And so they have found that to affect the midbrain, you need to jump in with conditioning. And that is what armies have done, is they have taken to Pavlovian and operant conditioning to make soldiers fire at will and to condition them not to hesitate in that fatal moment. Let's take a look at some of the Army's tactics for doing this here.
In fact, I was in the Tampa recruitment station when September 11th happened, and I had just finished signing my contract when my recruiter said, "Oh, go see what's on TV." Oh my God. I felt, well, this is the very reason that we have soldiers. I think everybody did. Everybody felt wrapped up in that patriotism. And in fact, I felt a kind of pride, because I felt that I was willing to serve before everyone realized there was a need to serve. In my basic training, doubt first kind of crept into my mind. I was a patriot. I knew that the military was going to be like that. I wasn't completely foolish walking into it. But I think I was taken aback by the force and the venom. It was something that I knew that they needed to do that, to turn people into soldiers, but it was still kind of shocking to see it. And more shocking of all was seeing myself falling in line with that, and seeing how easy it was when you're surrounded by people shouting, "Kill, kill, kill," to also step forward and shout, "Kill." That's when I began to get a sense that what I was doing wasn't right.
There was a lot of people coming out saying, yeah, that was my experience. I just couldn't kill. So the Army decided, well, that's not good. So the Army said, okay, how do we help them overcome this? And they said, let's condition people. So the idea is reflexive fire training.
As soon as the target pops up, you fire the weapon. Hit your shot.
And just conditioning.
Targets keep coming up, you take them out. Let's go.
Keep shooting. Keep shooting.
Let's go. Kill that thing.
What they want people to do is they're so trained, they just boom, boom, dead. All right, where's the next target? And that's good.
It becomes muscle memory. You don't think about it, you just do it.
Reflexive fire, it's the ability to engage targets, like upon reflex, and without thought.
Keep shooting.
And you raise and you shoot as fast as you can.
Hit them targets, kill them.
And when it comes to killing people, I can't say I don't mind, but I would do it. I'd have to do to defend my country, sir.
If I was in a combat situation, sir, I would do what I must in the situation that arose. And I don't cherish what I'd have to do, but I would do what I had to do.
So firing rates went up to like 50 to 60% during the Korean War as they introduced this kind of training. 85 to 90% in the Vietnam War, and I haven't seen any numbers on the current war, but I talked to a whole lot of company commanders and platoon leaders, and people say, people are more lethal than they ever imagined.
So there at the end of the clip, you can still see the officer, the Army officer, talking about what I just discussed with the SLA Marshall study and the fact that they were able to get firing rates up to 50 to 60% in Korea. And then in Vietnam, they got the firing rate up to 90 to 95%. And this is my complete layman's opinion, but one has to wonder if the rise in PTSD rates, although I'm sure it's due also to the increased awareness and the state of medicine nowadays, but you also have to wonder if the amount of veterans coming back who are terribly, terribly distraught with what they've had to do in the Middle East, if the prevalence of that is tied to the Army getting firing rates up so high, and also due to the fact that the soldiers on the field, and I think this is anecdotally evidenced by the fact that many service people coming back home are turned into libertarians or turned into ANCAPs because they see the state in its full-fledged, they see the state coming to being. They see the state at the full extent of what it inherently is, the true nature of what the state is, which is destruction. And like I said, I'm not a veteran. I've never been in any of these situations, so I try and reserve my judgment, but I know that war is mass murder, and I know that it's wrong, and that it has to end, and that the state purveys it. But other than that, there is a huge concern here that Lieutenant Colonel Grossman gets into, and that is, he is concerned, and I think this is kind of funny, is that he is concerned that the general public and civilians who aren't people that we've given the special permission to kill, he's concerned that the same tactics of conditioning are leaking into the civilian sector through violent video games, of all things, and other conditioning, desensitizing, killing. And I think that there might be some merit to that, because he makes the distinction between the forebrain thinking and the midbrain thinking. And I don't think that I don't think he's making the argument that it's the forebrain, that exposure to video games and stuff like that is manipulating the forebrain and making people actively pursue killing. I think I would have the caveat that it is maybe video games and the mass media propagating all this violence and stuff is affecting people's midbrain, so that when they get scared and they stop thinking with their forebrain, maybe then they would be more conditioned to violence. And that's a possibility. But just the great irony here, I think, of Dave Grossman expounding the fact that we need to condition our soldiers to perform in combat, and condition our police officers to perform in combat, as we'll get to here, talking about Dave Grossman and his side hustle. But I just think the dichotomy is so ironic that, we have these people that we've given a license to kill, but and there's no problem with that. We need to actually condition them to be better killers. But if civilians get these conditioning, then it's the downfall of society. And then he kind of talks about how we have soldiers coming back and trying to reintegrate into society, and we need to turn off we've used them up and we've conditioned them to kill and turn them into self-hating killers, and now we need to develop a society that condones that for those special people, and to help them turn the switch off, and to help society comfort the people who have gone out and committed these atrocities in their name, because that's the duty. That's what we do. We need to do it because, if we don't defend our society or defend our country, other people will come in and kill us. So we need to go all the way across the world and kill all these people to keep them from, it's circular logic. And it's something Dave Smith discussed with my buddy Mance Rader, who just appeared on Part of the Problem, which I'm very proud of and happy for him for that. It's so awesome. But to digress, I want to get into a little bit. I want to show you Dave Grossman's website here. Okay, so here we have Dave Grossman's website here of the Killology Research Group, and you get a little definition of what Killology means. I think there's some shock factor in the name Killology, but in his situation, he presents it as the scholarly study of the destructive act, as some kind of objective, we're going to study killing from a scientific perspective. But what he really does in his seminars here is one of which is the Bulletproof Mind. And what he does is he brings people such as military personnel, but mainly, or I don't know mainly, but police officers as well. And that's what it's been portrayed as in the media, as mainly police officers that he's giving this training to, teaching them to overcome their innate natural opposition to taking fellow life, and to teach them not to hesitate to take life. And here's some other alternate presentations he does in the groups. But I mean, to be fair to him, it's not all police training that he does. He also does safe schools and healthy students. I don't know if that, I'm not sure, you know, what he, let's see, we must protect the children who have been entrusted to our care. So I don't know. That seems, I haven't seen this seminar, but I have seen the Bulletproof Mind, and a lot of it is alarming. And in a lot of it, he gives what I think is wrong legal advice, what we'll get into here. But you can see here's his bio, and this is him himself. And I'll let you be the judge from the video footage, but I think he comes across to me as being a psychopath. And that's not an insinuation on him. I don't know him personally, obviously, but just judging from his mannerisms, he's a freaky dude. And we'll get into that. But I also wanted to highlight this article, this opinion article by Radley Balko, who's a libertarian type, but you can see it's appeared on the CIA-controlled WWII Post. Good old democracy dies in darkness, that frickin' adage that's still up there. Don't get me started on, you know, the U.S. being a republic and not ever a democracy. But anyways, here is Radley Balko's article talking about how Geronimo Yanez, the police officer who murdered Philando Castile either last summer or a couple summers ago, went to the Bulletproof Warrior or the Bulletproof Mind class offered by the Killology research group with Dave Grossman through one of his classes. It was taught by a partner, but yeah, it's just... this kind of details the more eyebrow-raising aspects of Dave Grossman's seminars, but I'll play a little snippet from it here. But it's just, you know, getting into this kind of situation. I don't know how much you can read through the video, but I'll include a link to this article in the show notes page. But it is just ridiculous, and I think that there needs to be, at the very least, if we are going to train our police officers like combat soldiers, there needs to be some kind of a national conversation about this. I mean, we have the Daniel Shaver incident where a man can be, you know, on the floor, obviously without a weapon, begging for his life, trying to comply with the police officer's orders, and him being executed and murdered with 7 AR-15, I believe it was 5 or 7 AR-15 223 rounds, killing him on the floor, crying like an animal. And I think that that is unacceptable, and I think that this is not a black and white issue. This is a state versus you issue, and we need to have a conversation about this at the very least. But let me, just for the interest of the program here, let me play a little snippet from Dave Grossman's The Bulletproof Mind.
There is no action you can engage in that will not be on CNN and YouTube tomorrow morning. You don't have to like it. You got to accept it. It's called reality. There's cameras and umpires everywhere. What we want in a modern liberal democracy in our army is we want to turn violence on and off like a faucet.
Now, you make the point that while killing may be an inherent taboo, it's something that can be learned.
The only way you make a frightened person react in a certain way is to drill it into them, to make it a conditioned response.
Conditioned response, that as soon as you see an enemy, right, you kill.
Every species, every mammal has a powerful built-in resistance against killing their own kind.
Now you begin the process of orchestrating the instruments together in a symphony of death and destruction!
Once you've made the decision to take a human life, you're a transformed creature, you're a predator. What does a predator do? They kill. Only a killer can hunt a killer. Are you emotionally, spiritually, psychologically prepared to snuff out a human life in defense of innocent lives? If you can't make that decision, you need to find another job. Whenever we survey cops about use of deadly force, they consistently tell us that number one concern is what? Begins with an L. Lawsuits, liability, lawyers, I'm going to get sued. Do you understand you can be sued for not shooting? Stand there and do nothing while people are murdered. What do they call that? Cowardice, malfeasance, dereliction of duty, deliberate indifference, blood on your hands. We might call it assisted suicide, because the one that dies next might be you, yes? There's only one way out. Know the law, know it well. Get every training opportunity you can. Don't be afraid of being sued. Everybody gets sued, just a chance for overtime. Be afraid of being successfully sued. Ecclesiastes 3:3. Time to kill, time to heal. Appreciate you, brother. Good to have you on board. Stay hard. Hurrah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Proud to be a serviceman. Stay hard.
Okay, so right away there I have to apologize for all the dramatic music and all the special effects added in the clips that I've played here, because my intention is not to dramatize this or make appeal to emotion or anything like that, and I don't want to smear Dave Grossman, but because obviously I don't know him as a person, but when it comes to these issues, I'm recognizing the fact that these people know that it's evil to kill and that it's wrong. And there's some kind of utilitarian justification going on for it with this circular logic about going abroad and killing people, and that we need to give people special permission to kill because society would unravel without it. And that is the evil that justifies mass atrocity in the world. And that's what we need to be fighting, is this belief that some people are above the law. And I've done a lot of work about that with voluntarism. Obviously, listeners of the show and the podcast know what that's all about. But I think it's supremely important to recognize it in the situation and to identify what it means to kill and what it means in our broader society to kill, and to see what people like Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman are doing in the military to undermine humans' natural resistance towards killing. And I'm not as concerned when it comes to things such as like violence in video games or conditioning the midbrain of civilians to kill through video games or mass media or something like that. I assume that his argument is the same as the old conservative argument that video games cause murder or whatever. But what I am concerned about is, okay, now let's take his assertion for fact that yes, at the very least, we are conditioning young people through video games and through media to be desensitized to violence in their midbrain and be conditioned to kill. Let's take that for what the assertion is. Well, then I just think that either the state or society or culture, all culture and society or the state or the powers that shouldn't be have to do is put people in a situation or trick their forebrain into thinking that it is necessary to kill. And I think the resounding message that I want to leave people with through this podcast is articulated by James Corbett in a segment that I'm going to play, but he posits the question, or the statement rather, or asserts that, the biggest fear of the elites is that they would plan a big World War III party and invite everyone to come and no one would want to show up. And that's the hope that I hold, is that our society has gotten to the point where we are civilized enough to the point now where people will notice this underlying fact that war is mass murder and there is nothing that justifies it. And they will refuse, hopefully, When the time comes for another major war, they will refuse, they will stay at home, and they will resist being sent off to kill by war pigs. Here's that clip from James Corbett.
There was Alan Bray of the Wiltshire Regiment. In July 1915, he was detailed to a firing squad to execute a deserter. He refused to do so. He said, "I thought that I knew why these men had deserted. I understood their feelings and what would make them desert." This is what the powers that shouldn't be actually fear. What if they held a war and nobody came? What if they refused to fight? There's no way to get accurate numbers on this because, of course, the British Army or any other army didn't want them to be recorded, let alone reported. But we do know that there were 306 British soldiers that were executed, put to death by firing squad, by their own fellow servicemen for the crime of desertion or cowardice, i.e. refusing to go over the top when ordered to go basically commit suicide. 306 soldiers killed by their own for the crime of being cowards and not wanting to fight. Of course, since this is such a powerful and pervasive phenomenon, of course, there's going to be social engineering techniques to overcome it. Like the Order of the White Feather, started in August 1914 by Admiral Charles Fitzgerald and his wife, and interestingly, some suffragettes and feminists got on board, but it became a very popular phenomenon. The idea was that a woman would go to a military-age man in England, in London, and if he was not in uniform, put a white feather on him. He is a coward. He refuses to fight. It was a phenomenon that took off. It became very popular to do this, and in fact was so effective that the British government started to worry because men who were employed in services that were in aid to the military, munitions or whatever, were not in uniform and were being labeled as cowards for not being in uniform. This was actually too effective a social engineering campaign, so the British Home Secretary, Reginald McKenna, had to start issuing king and country badges that men could wear to show, I'm not in the service, but I'm important, this is important for the military. This is the type of social engineering that goes on to make people do things they do not want to do. And we can laugh at this as being crude, ridiculous, but are we really that immune to those types of societal pressures today? They won't look like this, but they'll feel like this. And whether bombs start dropping or whatever type of war is declared or undeclared, the societal pressure to be involved in that, at least to go along with that, to support it in some way, support the troops, will be phenomenal. And people, maybe even people sitting in this room who think they can resist that kind of societal pressure, may not be able to. It's extremely powerful. But this is the point. It's an old sentiment. It's not startlingly new. It might seem corny. It might seem ridiculous. War is over if you want it? That's stupid. That's a pipe dream. Don't spend your days dreaming about that nonsense. Go and fight. But why? Why are they so scared of it? Why do they want you? Why do they spend so much time and energy and money and effort trying to propagandize you so that you believe in this cause? It's A, because no one really believes in it. It's just more BS from the same BSers that always do the same thing. And secondarily, well, because obviously they care about you and what you feel and what you believe and what you think. Your mind is the battlefield. And it's not about China and US, it's about every person on the planet. It is about conquering your mind, which is why maintaining our cognitive independence and not giving in to the idea that we have to fight anything for the benefit of some Kissinger-esque horrible minion of some global order that we don't want, we have to resist that. And that is our power. Our power lies in our consciousness. So let's end this talk on a more positive note. Don't worry. Even the British government will pardon you eventually, a century later, if you desert or are a coward. Thank you.
Okay, so a great and hopeful message there from Mr. James Corbett, one that I completely agree with and stand behind 100%. And I think that, as many in the libertarian field have said, Ron Paul, Scott Horton, Murray Rothbard, that war and peace is the most important issue. War, as I said, is a racket. It's the health of the state when the state comes into its own. And I think the most important thing that we can advocate for as libertarians is, in the biggest no-brainer, is to make sure that the state stops killing people. And I think that war, although so entrenched into what our country has become today, I think that it is the most important thing and the easiest thing perhaps we could stop from happening, in the sense that all we have to do is make the United States not go over there and kill people. And we could talk about logistics, about central banking, which allows warfare on this scale. Ron Paul has always said it's no coincidence that the era of central banking was also the era of total war. But I think it is worthy of us allying or siding with other groups, the liberty movement siding with other anti-war groups, and shaming the left for not being anti-war, but also trying to reach out to the conservatives to illustrate the fact that it is patriotic to be anti-war, in the sense, not the government sense, but patriotic in the liberty-loving freedom sense, and that true fiscal conservatives should be anti-war. So we should be shaming both sides, the left on the hippie grounds and the right on the conservative, thou shalt not kill the Bible. I think we're on the side of righteousness here, and I believe that we should keep pushing, most importantly, for peace. And I could mention Yemen, the atrocities happening there, or the 7 probably plus countries that we are bombing, or the US's involvement in Somalia. And I just think that we need to really stick to our guns here, and that the world around us seems to be swaying very recklessly towards the path of war. And with the global unrest that's happening, this is the most important issue. And so I wanted to thank the audience. Thanks to everyone who took the time to watch this podcast/documentary. I've never done anything so involved with video editing before, so if it comes off shaky or unprofessional, I'm still learning, I'm still practicing, and I appreciate your patience. But the main takeaway here is my call to action for the audience is to share this documentary, or this podcast, if you will. Share the show, share it with your friends, share the message. Primarily just the realization that mankind is inherently against killing its own. And this is a book review, which I've kind of forgotten in making it, but I would definitely actually go purchase On Killing, although I would do it used, as to not and try and send funds to Dave Grossman for supporting his ridiculous Killology program and for teaching police officers to kill like soldiers and conditioning them. I think, buy the book secondhand. There's useful knowledge in it, especially the mind-blowing part about how the actual death rates throughout war, throughout history, things that just changed the way I think about combat in general and the history of war. But like I said, the biggest thing I would do is share the show. Also, reach out to me. I am on Facebook, all social media platforms. Just search Liberty Weekly, pretty much every single one. I love talking. I love having conversations with people that listen to my content. It makes my day. It makes my day to spread liberty and to make these connections. And ultimately, that's all we have is each other in this movement. But also make sure you subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music. Hit the bell icon to be advised or notified of all my new content. I've been doing lots of live streams, and I actually might do one after I film this. So I'd definitely be on the lookout for that. Give me reviews on iTunes. Also, my Amazon affiliate link, I know it's coming up to the holiday seasons. I would get a small commission that would go towards supporting this content. libertyweekly.net/Amazon. But lastly, I just wanted to mention that I have used some video snippets here that I could see potentially getting flagged by YouTube as being copyright violations. But I believe that they are fair use, so I have included all the links to the videos in the show notes page here. Also, I'm going to add a fair use notice as well, so we'll see what happens. But if it does get flagged, I'm going to also upload it on BitChute and maybe DTube on the Steemit blockchain, and I will just make sure that the video version in some format will be available on my webpage at libertyweekly.net/LL, the letters 4, the number 4. As well. So thanks everyone so much for watching this documentary. I really appreciate it. I'd appreciate it if you would share the show, but also check out my live streams on YouTube. I live stream video games with libertarian commentary as well. I've been doing that on my break, so make sure you check that out. But all in all, make sure you go spread the messages of peace, love, and liberty. Have a good rest of the week.